Afternoon and welcome to our webinar on Flex, Don't Break, Making Flexible Working Sustainable. I'm Siobhan Bonita, I'm a former UK senior civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar today on behalf of Global Government Forum and our knowledge partner Workday. And we have two experts from Peakon, which is a Workday company, with us here today. Now, even before the pandemic, but especially over the last 18 months, many civil servants have been working from home. And research by the Cabinet Office and others shows that whilst remote working doesn't work for everyone, the majority of staff do want to maintain some of that flexibility going forward. And this means that departments and agencies in the civil service and across the wider public sector are having to think about how they make that flexible, hybrid, smarter future more sustainable. And whilst there are many benefits to home working, efficiency, well-being, reduced costs, operating a flexible workforce presents a unique set of challenges. For example, managing teams, establishing networks, inducting new colleagues, these might all become more difficult, and some traditional HR processes can struggle with implications for diversity and equality going forward. So all of that means that gathering information on people's experiences of flexible working and using insights from that information to provide tailored support for individuals and to help develop organisations' policies and processes is key. And we'll be discussing all of these issues with our great panel in a moment. But before I introduce our panel, and we'll hear from each of them, I just want to say that actually we also want to hear from you, our audience, today. So on whichever device you're using, you should see there's a Q&A function at the bottom of that device. At any time throughout this webinar, while you're listening to our panelists speaking or just after, please use that Q&A function to message in your questions, and we'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of the webinar today. And now to our great panel. So first we'll hear from Deborah Kunis, who is Senior Psychologist for Peakon, based here in the United Kingdom. She's worked in the field of organisational psychology for the last 10 years, and she's got deep expertise across the employee experience lifecycle and has used this to support organisations across public and private sectors to drive improvements in employee engagement and in organisational development, culture and change. Then we'll hear from Helen McMullen, who is Head of Talent Management and Development for NHS Professionals. Helen has over 20 years' experience in HR professional roles, both within the private sector and in the NHS, having joined NHS Professionals in 2008. Helen's particular passion is around developing staff alongside supporting their mental health through engagement and wellbeing programmes. And last but not least, we'll hear from Patrick Cournoyer, who is Chief Evangelist, also for Peakon, but Patrick is based in the United States. When implementing Peakon at the San Francisco technology company, where he was previously Vice President for People, Patrick was so impressed with both the product and the team that he moved halfway around the world to join Peakon in 2016. His passion is to inspire thought and action within the global HR community. So I'm sure you'll agree we've got a really stellar panel here today. As I said, please do use this opportunity to ask them any questions you like about the future of flexible working. And now, without further ado, I'm going to invite Deborah to give us her opening remarks. Over to you, Deborah.
Thank you, Siobhan. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to discuss a very relevant topic. We all know that changes brought about by the COVID-19 crisis have altered work in some radical ways. And I think one of the fundamental changes is actually physically where we're working, which for now, for many people, can basically be anywhere. And recent data from Gartner actually predicts that around 32% of all employees will be working remotely by the end of this year. And that's versus 17% in 2019. So we're probably witnessing the rise of the largest remote workforce in history. So organisations are now concerned with trying to manage the impact this is having and to maintain, or perhaps in some cases, enhance how employees are performing. And arguably, I was thinking about this, in roles in the public sector, there are even more potential far-reaching implications of that changing employee experience and a real imperative to protect what's working well and to improve what isn't. what civil servants and public sector workers do every day affects all of us. It affects people's lives, it affects our communities, it affects our society. And so the experience of all of these individuals in their roles is potentially even more critical. And one aspect that I find particularly interesting about this is that while we are more physically isolated working remotely, we have become more connected through tech than ever before. And there have definitely been advantages for some people in some roles. So, you know, less travel time, more time to spend with family, more flex around work-life balance, and even some evidence that people can be more productive at home, although this probably depends on individual characteristics and personality to some degree as well. But, you know, some people have a worse environment. So it may be small, it may be noisy, it may be busy, or really hard to get the right equipment. And then some jobs are just not suitable for hybrid working. And if there's too much time working remotely without physically seeing and connecting with people, this can lead to feelings of isolation and feelings of separation from the wider business. And a big part of, you know, work for people does relate to our experience of company culture. So this is about a sense of belonging, you know, feeling part of something bigger, whether that's your team, a group, a division, a company, and interaction with the customers that we serve. So the experiences that we have from this help to give context to behaviour, and remote working can make it harder for businesses to engage employees and really help them to feel part of that wider culture. And work makes up a massive part of our lives, obviously. We're there a lot. And for many, it forms part of what we call our self-concept, which is all about what we do, where and how we do it, and who with. And this all forms part of how we think of ourselves as a person. And also the relationships we have with others, you know, our team members, our leaders, that visibility, that physical proximity, and that sense of cooperation makes employees feel closer and part of a greater group with a greater purpose. And that's something that's really key to avoiding those feelings of isolation. And then in some cases, you know, if people are feeling isolated, especially perhaps also if they live alone, this might also be having a knock-on impact in terms of their broader well-being. And this is something that organisations do and should care about, both as caring employers, but also because it impacts performance at the end of the day. It impacts productivity and levels of well-being and sickness as well. There was a recent survey that Deloitte carried out across millennials, across 45 countries, and they found that over 46% of younger workers are now saying they're feeling stressed all or most of the time. So organisations are aware that they do need to elevate their focus on well-being and employee engagement, but the reality is that a lot of businesses aren't equipped or ready to act, don't have that infrastructure. So to make a success of a future working model and really build in flexibility in a sustainable way, I think there are three important areas for organisations to be thinking about. And obviously there are more than that, but these are the three that I think are key right now. Firstly, I think it's about providing choice and autonomy. Appreciating that everybody's situation is different, and that's okay. And I think our leaders and our managers, you know, need to have the skill to be having conversations proactively with their people to make sure everybody's needs are being met, and then navigating that in a really fair way. Secondly, development and growth. I think this need perhaps becomes even more important with employees more likely to be seeking new jobs due to, you know, the mobility that we're seeing in the market at the moment. And, you know, we see from our own data that the lack of a sense of growth is actually the largest predictor of attrition in employees. So we can't afford to neglect this through times of change when, you know, it may be tempting to sideline in favour of what we might see as more urgent areas of focus. And then finally, communication. Sounds obvious, but it's key. You know, it's never been more critical. And I think more importantly, it's the two-way nature of communication that's become more important. So more broadly, you know, seeking feedback and input from employees, putting them front and centre, and then tying all of that back to providing more of a sense of control, autonomy and say, has never been more key than it is now. And at Peakon, you know, we've seen that over the last couple of years, you know, the importance of all this has been elevated, having that more continuous approach to listening to our people, because different things have become more important and it's ever changing. So having that really robust listening strategy has become part of the employee value proposition for a lot of organisations. And it's also becoming a key differentiator in attracting and retaining talented employees as well. And it's interesting because where we first thought that demand for employee voice surveys might slow down due to cutbacks during the pandemic, For us, the opposite happened, because organisations were recognising that they had to better understand what employees were experiencing in their remote work situations in order to get a handle on how do we drive well-being, how do we drive performance and shape our strategy based on how much things have changed. And that's what it comes down to. It's really, at the end of the day, about understanding what employees are thinking, what they're feeling, what they value, what's going well, what isn't, where do they need more support, and what are their ideas, and then using all of that data to truly collaborate on and co-create what future working practices and approaches should look like. And some of this will come from leadership and managerial conversations, and managers do have a crucial role to play in all of this in terms of their skills, their behaviour. But I think a mechanism for more frequent listening, such as an employee survey, is also really key. And, employee surveys have, of course, been done for decades. But I think what the pandemic has highlighted is that more traditional, once a year type methodologies just aren't providing that more regular or sensitive enough data to capture these changes. And to enable the organisations that we work with to make the best decisions, and for individuals to truly feel heard. And as I say, alongside all of this, of course, manager and leadership roles are critical in effectively listening and responding to feedback, driving effective action and closing feedback loops. But I do think that only from the employee voice as a starting point can we make sure that how we work in the future, what those models look like, what we adopt, are truly sustainable, truly pragmatic for everybody and fit for the future. And I really do believe that that should all be informed from the bottom up as opposed to top down.
Thank you so much, Deborah. A fantastic presentation to set the scene and to kick us off. I think you've raised some issues that we'll see throughout the other presentations and that the audience, I'm sure, will be interested in. So definitely setting that sense that remote working, home working has had benefits for some, but not for everybody, that it's been a mixed picture. So therefore, the importance of choice going forward is really important. Just that real stressing, though, that listening to staff is crucial. And this has to be bottom up, that things are different for different people. You mentioned they're the younger workers. I think that will be something that I think the audience are interested in as well. And then also touching on what does it mean for managers and leaders going forward? I think that's something maybe that sometimes gets overlooked in these conversations as well. So loads of things that we will pick up in the conversation going forward. Thank you so much, Deborah. Helen, I'm going to invite you now for your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Deborah. That's a great link into what I'm going to be talking about today. So for many of you here today, COVID-19 brought a ground sweeping change, I'm sure, to your businesses, as it did to ours. I'd like to start by explaining who we are and what we do at NHS Professionals. Created in 2001 and wholly owned by the Department of Health and Social Care, we manage the staffing banks of over 55 NHS trusts across England. So, as you can imagine, we were very much in the thick of things as the pandemic spread. Through our Stand Up, Step Forward, Save Lives campaign, recruiting for the Nightingale hospitals, resourcing a test and trace workforce, and supporting the national vaccination programme. All this happened as we also moved 80% of our workforce into working remotely, with the remaining 20% continuing to operate out of our client trust hospitals. To say that was a challenge would be a bit of an understatement, but I am so proud of the support we were able to provide to our NHS, even as our staff had to balance this really critical work with the impact of the pandemic on their families, loved ones, homeschooling, and general lives. To support this new way of working, we really needed to understand how our people were feeling. And we were lucky enough to trial Workday's engagement survey tool, Peakon, during the summer last year. Our survey questions at that time really focused on how people were coping working remotely, how their well-being was being impacted, and how we as an organisation could support them through the pandemic. The results of these monthly surveys brought the subject of mental health and well-being right to the forefront of our priorities. Whilst it's been an area we'd kind of dabbled in previously, it became apparent that much more was needed to give to our people the support they required. This involved creating a robust wellbeing strategy audited by Unum, setting up a wellbeing working party, and getting over 30 of our people to train as mental health first aiders. Alongside this, we created a wealth of resource on our learning management system, covering topics such as managing teams remotely, working from home with children, how to maintain good physical and mental health, and a whole host of links to external websites offering support and guidance during what were unprecedented times. On the back of these surveys, we introduced a number of initiatives that supported the health and well-being of our people. My Time, which is a half hour of protected time each week for people to switch off, go for a walk, talk to the neighbour over the fence, or just play with the kids. We ran We Are Not in the Same Boat sessions, weekly video calls offering a safe space for people to share how they were feeling and to get support from their colleagues. Really recognising that whilst we were all in the same storm, it was impacting us all very, very differently. And walk and talk meetings. I don't know about you, but these back-to-back Teams and Zoom calls have been exhausting. So we introduced meetings that were off the computer, they were on the phone, and it gave attendees the opportunity to get outside and walk as they talked. We had some fun too, encouraging our employees to join quiz nights, sign up for coffee connections, giving people the opportunity to meet new colleagues over a virtual coffee, and sharing their pandemic stories on Yammer. Just really all things to keep us connected. So what now? Things are beginning to return to some sense of normality, with a slow return to the office taking place. And I personally have absolutely loved being able to see colleagues in the flesh and catch up on their lives. And as an organisation, we are taking it really slowly. We're listening to what our people say about this new way of working, and we very much support the hybrid or smart or flexible, whatever you want to call it, model. However, we know that that will mean ongoing support for managers and for our employees on how to work remotely, and continually adapting to both the requirements of our business and the needs of our staff. For many people, as Deborah said, they love the flexibility of being able to work remotely. But for others, they need to be office-based for mental health reasons, or just because they don't have a suitable space to work from at home. We're not sure yet what our new model looks like, but I can say it will be very, very different from what we had before COVID hit us. So we will continue with all the previously mentioned initiatives that we began during the pandemic. We'll continuously review our leadership culture to ensure that this new way of working is both sustainable as well as being effective. We'll build on our online learning resources to provide ongoing support for our line managers so they can support their teams and inspire them remotely. And we'll keep listening to our people and see what happens. But I absolutely believe it will be the right model for our business, our customers, and most importantly, our people.
Helen, thank you so much. I mean, I just want to actually take a moment just to say thank you to you, and also to all of your staff, because just their hearing, I mean, it's so easy for us to forget, but the huge task that you had to do in terms of setting up the things you mentioned, the Nightingale Hospital, the test and trace, people to staff that, people to staff the vaccination task force, all of that. This was a massive undertaking. And as you say, never, ever, more than now, did you need to understand what that meant for people and what their experiences were like. So it's really good to hear from you how you put into practice the Peakon work and the Peakon surveys and how that helped you. Again, as I said, picking up on the themes that Deborah had mentioned there, the importance of listening, the fact that it's constantly changing. So looking ahead, how can we make this sustainable? And just really love some of those real initiatives that you mentioned, the walk and talk meetings, the My Time to switch off, creating spaces to safely share and connect experiences. I think our audience will resonate with a lot of those things. So thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I'm now going to hand over to Patrick for his remarks.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I mean, Helen, incredibly impressive, the initiatives that you've taken, and on top of just running a incredibly important part of the public sector. It's incredibly impressive. And I really liked the part towards the end where you were saying, we don't know what the future is. And I truly believe every organization is in that spot. And I think it is okay for all of us to take a minute and say, it is okay that we don't know what the future is going to be. There is no magic book that says this is how you build your next journey. But I think you brought up an incredibly important point, which is the fact that if we put people at the center of our decisions moving forward, then we will build a strong organization moving forward. And I think that is a core part of what employees, quite frankly, are expecting now. The world of work, we know this, has significantly changed in the past 18 months. And I spend a lot of time with many customers, many colleagues around the world in many different industries that are figuring out what their futures are going to be and what their journeys are going to be. As Siobhan said, I live in the US now, but I just recently moved back from the UK. I lived in London for the past 3 years and was working very closely with UK organizations, was working very closely with European organizations. And there's a lot of consistency across the world with what employees are expecting. I'm just going to share a couple of slides with you, building a bit off of what Deborah was saying. Deborah shared a lot of great information from Deloitte, also from Gartner, with some perspective on what the future of work is going to look like. And here at Peakon, we also have a really incredibly deep set of data for us to understand how employees are feeling and what employees are talking about. And that is the important part of the part of the presentation I'm going to give you today is focused around what employees are talking about. We looked at 30 million employee comments from over 160 countries around the world. Alexa, if we go to the next slide, this statistic is quite a staggering statistic. 59% of employees globally are disengaged at work. That means only 41% of employees are either partly engaged or actively engaged in work. And this is a significant challenge because disengagement not only has significant effects on our organizational culture, on how our teams interact and how they work together, but ultimately it costs money. It costs organizations a lot of time, effort, and quite frankly, money when we have disengagement in our workforce. And we have never had a better opportunity to engage our workforce and to have them be included in the future that we are building than we have today. There are so many positive outlooks and aspects that we can take as far as how we can build the future together with our employees at the center of what we do and understanding the voice of our employees. And that's, you'll hear that as a common thread today, but it is probably the most important thing that we can be doing right now is listening to our employees, understanding the insights from what they have to say and taking meaningful action on it. So if we go to the next slide, talk about flexible working. To give you some perspective, the proportion of comments around flexible working, so looking at these 30 million comments across the world, increased by 125% globally year over year. That is discussions within Peakon around flexible working. That is a significant increase. So not only is it that organizations know that flexible working is needed, this is top of mind and top of conversation for employees, and employee expectations are changing at a fast pace, faster than they ever have in the past. So it is very important for us as organizations to make sure that we stay on top of what those expectations are and how they're changing. Deborah shared an interesting statistic at the start, which is around, I believe it was around millennials and their level of stress in the workplace and daily stress. And another statistic that we have found within Peakon is that 29% of people say that they are on the brink of burnout. That is 1/3 of our workforce. That is significant. That is a massive number on the brink of burnout. And as Helen said, this is not all. We have a ways to go. And so we need to really be focusing on how do we turn these numbers around, particularly around burnout. The World Health Organization is now recognizing burnout as a significant issue across the world. So these statistics really, hopefully, and have really inspired organizations to take a look at how they can be better in many different areas, including flexible work. On the next slide, I think this also ties into what Deborah was saying earlier, is flexible working and the environment is not the same for everyone. In our data, we also found that employees that have caring responsibilities, particularly women in the workplace, have seen their workload scores fall. To put some context around what that means, we ask employees their satisfaction level of multiple, what we call key drivers of engagement. Workload is one of them. And particularly the workload, the satisfaction with workload has decreased with women. And also we were able to uncover a bit more around caring responsibilities being a part of that. So as we build our future of flexible work, whatever we're going to call it, I don't think there's a certain term that you need to use or that organizations need to use, but we do need to think about how are we looking at the different people that we have in the organization and how we create a environment, a flexible working environment that is right for them. Not only is every organization different, inside our organizations, there are significantly different needs, and that presents a challenge. I mean, quite honestly, it presents a challenge for us. However, it is a challenge that we can meet. It is a challenge that we can overcome if we listen and we understand the different pockets of our organization and what those needs are. And on the next slide, I think the statement is just an important one to think about, is we need to be considering not only what we are doing today, but we need to be building programs and infrastructure in our organizations that are fit for the future. There's a lot of data that is coming out around projections with the workforce in 2 to 3 years. And while I don't like to make blanket statements around generations in the workforce, it is quite interesting to understand how generations in the workforce are experiencing their work environment and also what their expectations are and how their expectations are evolving. And Deborah mentioned earlier this expectation around growth, and that being a very clear predictor of why employees leave organizations. And that's not just growth, that's mentoring within an organization, that's career path within an organization. All of these are key indicators. We can see that when the level of satisfaction decreases with employees in this area, that is a key indicator that the employee is potentially going to leave the organization. We need to retain our talent now more than ever. And we need to be positioned in a way to attract the best talent in the future, now, 2-3 years from now. And one of the challenges that in working with a lot of public sector organizations is, how do we stay and how do we be as competitive, or if not more competitive, than the private sector? And that is something every organization needs to think about, because, as I said, younger generations in the workforce have very clear, very high expectations from their employers around what they're providing to them, about how they're going to build their individual growth plans. And they're also making significant connections with their personal values and their organization's stated external values as a business. And I predict that those generations will choose a place to work and to build their careers more on those opportunities for growth, those individual experiences, those correlated values, more than what the paycheck is going to be, what they're going to take home in their paycheck every month. So we have a great opportunity now. If we're not focused on those things, how do we build these programs to be sustainable for the future and position us to be a compelling and competitive employer 2 to 3 years from now? Because we need to start building those programs today. So I could talk for quite some time, but I know we're going to do questions, and but just wanted to set the stage a little bit about what I'm seeing, some perspectives from Peakon, some additional perspectives from Peakon, and hopefully valuable.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Definitely valuable. And as you say, there are a reminder to the audience, please do message in any questions that you've got. We've already had a question in about the Peakon employee expectations report and can that be shared? And I see that gone round. So if you're in the audience, that should have come round on your chat function for you. So absolutely, you can look at that. But
we also, Siobhan, also just on that note, we have one other report, which I think is quite interesting. We have a health and well-being report that we just put out about a month ago. We can also put the link in here. And those are both
get that sent round as well. Fantastic, thank you. I mean, really sobering statistics there, Patrick. The things you said, around 59% of employees being disengaged at work, and nearly a third, 29%, on the brink of burnout. And as you said, never before have we had an opportunity, just in the way that you're able to gather insights through getting all of that data and information in, to change this and to make things better. So it's a real moment in time where we can do better. And I think something you said, which just stressed what Deborah and Helen had said, is that for every single individual, this is different. The journey is different. What they need is different. Their requirements at home are different. So I think that's one of the big changes, I think, from maybe what people were experiencing in the workplace up until now, is looking at what's the right solution for that individual, and an organization being able to listen to their individuals about what they need. And then a really good place, before we go into the Q&A that you ended on there, looking to the future, what a future generation's going to want in terms of attracting them, but keeping them in that organization. So thank you so much to our fantastic panel for those opening comments. Please do message in your questions now. I'm going to kick off with something actually that you kind of mentioned there, Patrick, at the end, I think, which is to all of you, I'm going to ask this question though. As we look ahead to a hybrid future, how do you think the public sector is comparing to the private sector in terms of preparing themselves for this? Do you think the private sector are ahead of the public sector in terms of putting in place kind of flexible working arrangements? And what's the public sector going to have to do to make sure it can continue to compete in that world and to recruit and retain the very best people? Does it come down to values, or are there other things, as you all mentioned in your presentations? I'm going to change the order a little bit. Maybe Helen, because you worked in both private and public sectors, how do you see the public sector rising to this challenge going forward?
I think that obviously there are roles within the public sector, our frontline doctors, nurses, care support workers, that, you know, they have to be at their place of work. So I think it's more for them, it's about ensuring we're supporting them. We're giving them the opportunities to work flexibly, but they still have to come into their place of work. But providing that right well-being support. Patrick talked about burnout. Well, we've certainly seen that, haven't we, within the NHS, and I think we will continue to see that. So to attract people want to work in the NHS, but it's hard work and it's going to be hard. So I think really for each individual trust to have those values, to have what they stand for, and live them, not just have them on the wall. Actually, really,
You
truly live
definitely
them.
don't join the NHS to become rich.
No,
That's one thing.
no.
It is very values driven.
Yeah.
Patrick, I'm going to come back to you to pick up on what Helen has said there. How do you see the public sector competing with the private sector?
I feel that, Deborah, this is something you touched on, and I think this is an area where the public sector is a bit behind the private sector. And there's a great opportunity, which is embracing technology and bringing new technology into the workplace. I think it's probably a bit easier for the private sector to be able to do that and to implement technology at scale. However, technology has made the ability to empower flexible working so much more effective, more impactful, and quite frankly, just so much easier. Less friction points for the employee, for the organization. I was speaking with an organization that a big, very regulated organization, pharmaceutical organization. One of the things that they were saying was, we can't have employees work from home. Like, this was pre-pandemic. We can't have employees work from home because we're too regulations. Like, we can't have employees connect remotely because it's too regulated. It's too controlled. It's too much of a secure environment. The pandemic happened. Everybody had to go home. And in 4 days, their organization, their IT team figured out how to make this work. On a Friday, employees went home. On Monday morning, employees were connecting through secured networks to be able to connect and do their work. So I think it is the opportunity for all of us to say, bringing technology into an organization at scale it's tough. However, it is the future, and it absolutely is a proven ability to empower this new world of work, this flexible working, in a much more effective way. So I think that is an area where the public sector can look at how can we be more effective bringing technology into the work we do.
Thanks, Patrick. Deborah, moving from kind of technology to more kind of the psychology going forward, are there different motivations at play for people going into the private sector and the public sector? And how does that work in kind of a hybrid future?
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think, infrastructure and technology are a big part of things, but I think alongside this, there's an opportunity for organisations, actually both in the private and public sector, to start taking stock of and shaping the organisational culture and thinking about the impact that that's having in terms of, what we're ready for and the actions that we're taking. I think in the private sector, you're more likely to find sort of adult cultures where people are empowered and people are entrusted to get on and do things in the way they see fit, rather than worrying about where they do it. That's a bit of a sweeping generalization, but there is a tendency in terms of certainly what I've seen across different organizations. Culturally, there are quite big differences and gaps that I think we might need to think about bridging to bring that parity.
Interesting. Thank you. We've had a question in from the audience, and I think one of you mentioned productivity in your presentation, but Jennifer Thorne has asked, do any of you know of any data or research, I guess, related to civil service productivity in the hybrid or virtual format compared to productivity before in a more traditional in-person format? And I think some work has been done on this because I've heard of it referred to, but does anybody know anything about productivity levels going up in a hybrid or down in a hybrid situation compared to a traditional format? Patrick, is this anything you've come across in the work that Peakon have done?
I can't, off the top of my head, I can't specifically think of where we've looked into this. Yesterday, I was at an event there was a gentleman that was talking about some research around not so much around productivity, but I think connected to it was around collaboration and people having this perception that collaboration falls apart when people are not in the same space. And the research that he was saying that his group was doing was focused on saying that is absolutely not true, because having people be in distance locations has not decreased the amount of collaboration that's available. I'll try to find that data point so that we can share it. It's a good question, Jennifer. I think it's something that would be interesting to look into. But I do think this indicator around collaboration is a good indicator. I personally don't think productivity has or would decrease.
I was going to say, it might be slightly early for the art. Maybe people are going to be looking at that,
True,
looking back over the period. Deborah or Helen, was there anything you wanted to add on productivity, or do you also think it's something that maybe we'll do the research on and it will come out in a...
Yeah, I think we'll look back. Certainly from our point of view, the working remotely, the amount of hours that people put in because they weren't having that commute time, our productivity went up.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't necessarily go up because people were working much longer hours, 10 to 12 hour days. So, but we haven't done any sort of real investigation into that.
Yeah. I've certainly heard that anecdotally, that people have been, if anything, working more than they were before. We've got lots of questions coming in now. So we've got one from Jason Hiscox, who has said, how do you anticipate data security changing as services move to more hybrid working? I know this is something people are concerned about. So an office environment can be secure, you know, and all of the kind of security things are in place and risks are easy to access. How do you scale that out to home locations, particularly if people are working on confidential kind of issues? Helen, is this something you've had to consider and put in place with your staff?
Absolutely. So when we all moved to remote working, just like the company Patrick was talking about, we probably had 20% of our people with home setups. So to then push out everybody to have a home setup, we obviously had to look at the security. You know, we have access to applicants' records and personal data. So, you know, there are so many IT applications out there. There is no excuse for a company to say, oh, we can't do it, because these systems were in place before the pandemic hit. It's just people didn't really want to use them. So I think it's about talking to your IT experts to ensure that you've got that secure network and the secure connections. It's no different to me logging onto my bank, right? You know, I expect my money to be safe, and therefore I expect there to be a secure network. It's the same, and it can be done.
Yeah. Do you think there's some kind of training, and maybe a different training needed for people? Maybe, especially, I know Patrick and Deborah mentioned sort of younger staff members who may be living in shared accommodation, you know, and if they're having to have quite confidential conversations, for example, should there be some training done on what is and isn't appropriate in a home environment where other people might hear your conversations, for example? Absolutely.
And we sent out those guidelines right at the beginning. When we first went remote working, we sent out some really good guidelines about where you are and keeping your space secure and not having your screens accessible or people hearing your conversations, and kind of link that to the well-being as well, and moving away from your computer and getting outside. Yeah. So I think, you know, you tell people you can do virtual training. I have a team of trainers who are virtually training. You can do that just as easily. And Zoom and Microsoft Teams that we didn't really use before we went into the pandemic has suddenly become our world.
Yeah, absolutely. Deborah, this issue about data security, is that something that people have concerns about in the work that you've done with PCON?
It's interesting because of the sensitivity of the data that we're collecting on a minute by minute, weekly, hourly basis. This is something that we're considering constantly. You know, security is everything in terms of our integrity and how we do business. So for us, nothing really has changed in terms of how we do that. It's always been first and foremost our priority in terms of protecting people in the way that we need to.
Thanks, Deborah. Patrick, is this something that you've had to adapt as well in the data that you handle?
I do, and I think to Helen's point, this is another area where organizations can absolutely embrace technology to be able to support this. I agree with Helen. I think every company can do this. It may cost money. It's going to probably be a change management challenge within an organization. However, I think everything we think about today, we need to think about building scalable solutions for the future. And so much has been fast forwarded in the past 18 months. However, that fast forwarding is, again, I try to bring this positive perspective of, yes, it's probably going to be a lot of work to bring in connections and making sure that data is secure, obviously, because that's incredibly important. However, if we put the effort and time in now, how well positioned we're going to be in a year or 2 years from now. So I definitely don't think it will be easy. However, I think it is something we can absolutely be accomplished. And accomplishing it now is just setting us up for a much stronger future.
Yeah, thanks. We've got on a slightly different note. So we've got a question here from Megan Southern, who has said, my workplace are likely to move from pretty much everybody working at home now to a mixture. And I think this is what we're talking about. Some people will be still fully at home, some people will be fully in the office, and some will be doing a mix of both of those. So what suggestions do you have for tools or tips that would help in that situation? And I want to combine that question with one that I had in mind, which is managers. You all mentioned managers, I think line managers and managers. Do they have the skills to manage a kind of hybrid future? And how would, for example, if you've got a team with some of them working at home, some in the office, some coming in now and again, are managers equipped in the public sector to deal with that kind of situation? So any thoughts from any of you on kind of insights or anything that you've seen that's worked well in practice of how we can manage these kind of hybrid teams going forward? Helen, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yeah, so again, we did quite a lot of providing training around managing remotely. I have a team that some come in, now we're back into the office. Sometimes we're in together, sometimes some are dialing in, we're in a meeting room or we have a team meeting, and it works, you know, we can all be talking to each other and in the same group. But I think it really is getting managers trained in how to manage remotely. I have been on a team meeting where a manager allows their people not to have their screens on, right? Mm-hmm. Don't do that. Because how can I tell if Patrick works for me? How can I tell if Patrick is having a good day or a bad day? Mm-hmm. You can tell when you see people and you interact over the screen. So I think it's really important to use the tools that are available and make the most of them, and just make sure that managers are staying in touch with their people on a regular basis. So I have a daily call with my team. Never did that before the pandemic. We're more connected now than we were before. Yeah. And we will keep that going even when we start coming back into the office. Yeah. So I think we can do more and we should do more to support the managers. I think you just got to work at it.
Yeah, thanks. Deborah, I mean, you mentioned this in your presentation quite a lot, the need for belonging, a risk of isolation, and also what does that mean for managers? So this question about how do you manage a team maybe that's doing a bit of everything, that must be something that you've been thinking about, that organizations have been worried about.
Yeah, but I think, you know, if there's one thing that stood out to me over the last couple of years, it's how amazing it's been to watch not only organizations just pivot really quickly, but also watch individual managers just adapt to remote working and managing their teams on a remote basis. Yeah. And my honest opinion is that I think the managers who are excellent at leading their teams will continue to be excellent, whether they're present or not. I think those who were less so will remain less so unless we bridge that gap. But I think the difference between the two will become more apparent in a remote context. So I think when we think about manager development, more often than not, it's the soft skills that make up the biggest difference. So, you know, having and using high levels of emotional intelligence, you know, being open-minded, approachable, available, supportive, being able to have great conversations, being open to feedback. And I think all of those things were always critical before, and they will always continue to be, but they're even more crucial now. But the good news is that all of those things can be learned, can be practiced, can be developed and improved. So it's just a case of honing in on those particular skills, I think, to make people's experience more positive.
Thanks, Deborah. Patrick, for you similarly on this, I know Peakon do a lot of work in terms of listening to staff and listening to employees, but equally, how do you support managers in terms of what to do with that insight and that information to make sure they're managing hybrid teams effectively?
Yeah, to continue the thread around managers, managers are a critical component of all of our success as organizations for the future. We cannot underestimate the need for supporting and developing our managers to be effective in so many more ways than they ever have been. And I'll just give you some specific examples. Deborah, you brought up a really good point around skills. I think we as organizations need to be focused on skills and skills-based knowledge. How do we understand the skills that our managers, I'll just use managers as an example. I think this should be across the whole organization, but let's just talk about managers. The skills that our managers have today, the skills that they feel comfortable and confident in, the skills that they need for the future. We talk about well-being. If we think about 2 years ago, what we were talking about with well-being was physical well-being, gym programs, activity programs. Now, in 18 months, people are talking about mental health with their managers, much more open and available talking about mental health. Financial well-being is another highly talked about topic in an organization. And that can be a very uncomfortable place for a lot of companies to talk about financial well-being with their employees. Managers having their employees come to them and say, I have mental health challenges. And Megan, to your question, I'm going to be transitioning back into the workplace. I'm really stressed, or I have a lot of anxiety around that. And frontline employees are now going directly to their managers to talk about that, not HR like it used to be. So how do we empower managers to be confident and comfortable having conversations around mental health? Many managers out there are not, they're scared of it. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to handle it. And though that, I think that's a really good example of, we need to truly understand what a manager needs today to be an effective leader for their specific teams, because we have large, complex organizations. But if we focus in on these people leaders and empower them to be able to be the conduit for successful returning to the workplace, successful embracing of flexible work, and more confident and comfortable talking about some of these challenging conversations, then I think that is an area where we need to focus.
Thanks, Patrick. We've still got lots of questions coming in. So we've
great.
From Jennifer Thorne. I think we might have had another one from Jennifer, but this is quite interesting. This is around, do we have any data or analysis of the employee experience and expectations on virtual or hybrid working from a diversity perspective? So some studies seem to be pointing to a more positive employee experience for example, people with disabilities or people from ethnic minority groups. Does that resonate with any of you? Is it, have you had particular experiences of people in different groups? And I want to add to that as well. Is there a risk? I mean, Jennifer's saying that it's been an overall positive experience maybe for some groups, but is there a risk going forward that for some people who choose, maybe because of caring responsibilities, for example, that they might want to stay at home more than go in the office? Is there a risk they'll get left behind a little bit in terms of kind of being overlooked for promotion opportunities and those kind of things if they're not actually physically in the office? So a diversity question, I think. There are positives, but also could there be negatives in terms of a hybrid future? Deborah, I'm going to ask you to start this one.
Yeah, I think perhaps in some organisations, that could be a risk. I think to a large degree, we need to think about how do we encourage individual employees, whoever they are, to have more ownership in terms of proactively going and seeking things like development opportunities, proactively networking with people, giving them the confidence to do that, reaching out to people, having good conversations, voicing concerns, whether they're in the office or not. And I think organisational culture, again, I'll come back to that, does play a massive part in providing, the psychological safety that enables that to happen quite organically and easily. But I think individual behaviour is also a really big part of that. It comes back to how high a culture of trust I think we have within the organisation itself. But I haven't seen any specific studies in terms of, how that's playing out.
Okay, Patrick, do you think on the equality and inclusion side of things, there is a risk that actually this could impact negatively on kind of progress being made on the equality front, or do you think there are benefits as well?
One area that I have seen a lot of organizations shift to, and I think this is a positive step forward, is many organizations used to manage to time. They used to manage to hours of work. They used to, manage to, are you logged in at 8 o'clock in the morning? And not only the pandemic really shifted that, but I think a lot of organizations, even before the pandemic, really started to focus more on managing to work output as opposed to time. And I think that shift is a really positive one in many ways, because if we focus as organizations on clear expectations around work output and work product, and then we focus on the results with that, celebrating the success with that, and managing to the output of work as opposed to the time of work, I think we do alleviate some of those maybe unforeseen or unknown bias that may happen in the workplace, which is, oh, well, because this group maybe needs specific time away because they have childcare responsibilities, right? And there could be like an unconscious, well, maybe that group isn't working as hard because there could just be a lot of unconscious things that are coming out of that. But if we more focus on, this is the expectation of work output, the person in the organization is meeting those or exceeding those expectations around work product, I think that is a really good place to focus, because we can eliminate some of those potential unconscious biases that we have in the workplace that we don't even really think about.
Thanks. Helen, I mean, I guess my bias is that the public sector is probably marginally better than the private sector when it comes to focusing on diversity and inclusion. Is this something that you've then thought about as a priority for a hybrid future, making sure that we don't go backwards, for example, in those areas?
Absolutely. But I think potentially there's more danger of presenteeism, actually. And as long as our managers, and we train our managers to continue with their one-to-ones, setting objectives and reviewing objectives, talking about their development with their staff, I don't see how it makes a difference if someone's working remotely 3 days a week or somebody's in the office all week. And I think, to Patrick's point, the flexibility for example, working mums, they've absolutely loved it. And I've actually found, where I've had a couple of working mums, they will take time out. They did take time out when they were schooling, but they were on at night. And when the kids were in bed, they were back on and they were trying to get their work done. So I think they liked the autonomy, that actually they worked even harder because they were so grateful that they were given the opportunity to do that. And I think that's the same for any diverse culture or whatever. I think we treat people the same.
Yeah. Well, we've had a question. I see Deborah's already answered this on the Q&A, but I want to put it to Patrick and Helen as well. So I think it's Isla Morris Casey. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that correctly, but Helen mentioned productivity. She said, you mentioned earlier, and that some people have put in longer hours. So what can we do to make sure that individuals do take the time out that they should do, so that they have their lunch breaks? And I know you mentioned some of the initiatives, Helen, that you talked about, the half time out, half hour out and things. And Deborah has said, Deborah, you can come in on this again if you like, but it also starts with how leaders kind of model their own behaviours and making sure they log on and everything. But Helen, I'll come back to you on this one first. Do you think there is a danger actually in the hybrid future that people end up working longer than they did before? Because that blurring that distinction between home and the office, it might becomes quite easy just to stay sat in front of your computer, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. And during last year, we had one individual who shared on Yammer, and a lot of us took it up, that he used to get up in the morning and walk around the block before he logged on. That was his commute to work. And at the end of the day, he shut down his computer and he walked round the other way, back round the block. For him, that was the end of his day. And we just loved this idea. So we did it. We kind of shared it across the business. We've also done things like, because you were asking for advice there, on our computer screens, our screen saver up, we have in time to log off, end of day checklist. So it pops up at the end of the day. You know, have you done this? Have you reached out to someone today? And now you're logging off. So I think that there are small things that you can do. Our leaders, our exco, all put lunch breaks in their calendars, unheard of before this, because there was a recognition that we were all just working through. So they were then role modeling the right behavior. For those that use Microsoft, it pops up with focus time. And it's, if you see some spare time in your diary and it says, do you want to book this focus time? We encourage people to use that so that meetings aren't being put in. And we also introduced meeting times rather than an hour. And again, you can do this in Microsoft. So if it starts at 2 o'clock, it'll finish at 2:50. Gives you that 10 minutes to go use the bathroom or get a cup of coffee.
So again, it's showing how technology can help as well, especially at the margins of these things. Patrick, have you got any tips for people on how they make sure that they take the necessary breaks and don't actually end up working longer than they did before?
Yeah, I think there's just two tangible suggestions. Deborah or Helen just gave a couple of great ones. One is I have seen organizations that focus on only certain hours or certain days are allowed to have group meetings booked. And I think that is a very good initiative. We have, for example, on Fridays, not as many meetings on Fridays to allow people to catch up and to close out the week and prepare the week so that they're not working over the weekend. So our teams avoid having any type of group meetings on Fridays, only really critical business meetings on Fridays. And people really commit to that. And this may sound a bit bold, but I think we also need to, this is based also on what Deborah was saying around creating psychological safety, like empower employees to decline a meeting, to say, I can't attend that meeting at that time. It doesn't work for me. Let's find another time that works. I think people are fearful to decline things. If your leader puts a meeting on your calendar or a senior leader, if it doesn't, it's okay to say something doesn't work and to find an alternate. I just think we need to empower and embrace that because it's one meeting. We can find another time for a meeting, but people sometimes don't want to decline things. Well, there's 10 people in this meeting. I don't want to be the one that can't come. Well, we can find another time that works. So I think it's empowering people to not be afraid to have a voice. If something truly doesn't work for you, you need to.
It is interesting, isn't it, that when in face-to-face, you might say to somebody, I'm really busy.
Could we do it right?
Remotely,
yes.
Kind of feel obliged to accept that meeting invitation. Absolutely. I can't believe how fast the time.
I know.
We've probably got time for one, possibly two more questions. But before we do that, I just want to say to the audience, an email has just come around. It will be in your inboxes. It's a very quick questionnaire. If you don't mind taking a few minutes just to fill that in after this webinar, I'd be hugely grateful. It just means we can give you the webinars that are most useful for you going forward. So much appreciation from me in advance. We've got Jonathan Page Swan, who's just come back on something, Helen, that you mentioned before about screens, where you said you liked being able to see people so you can see what they're like. And he's putting an interesting point, which is maybe some staff are uncomfortable being on camera. Obviously, if they were in real life, they would have to be face to face anyway. So there's that point. But the issue I'm interested in is he said maybe we don't have good Wi-Fi and can't cope with audio and video. So I want to broaden that out a little bit and say, to what extent do you think in a hybrid future, organizations have to be responsible for making sure people have the physical kind of software and everything that they need and hardware at home be able to engage effectively as if they were in the office? And if that is the case, isn't that going to add quite a significant costs to an organisation if they need to set up a physical space in an office and replicate that at home? Patrick, you're kind of nodding there. Is this something you've had to deal with already?
It is. And I think two quick thoughts on that. One is a lot of organizations that I have been working with and also just been researching, as they look at how office space is changing, the idea of having an individual working space or desk for every employee, those organizations that are supporting a hybrid workforce are really switching their workspaces to collaborative workspaces, so that when people are in the office, or if they're working home for 3 days and working in the office for 2 days, so not everybody having a workspace in the office, and rediverting that money to creating more effective, more connected workspaces at home. Because that's, I'm sorry, his name popped out of here, but it's a good point as far as bandwidth. Jonathan Page, yeah. It's a good point, Jonathan, because many employees didn't have that speed of Wi-Fi to be able to support Zoom, or and also, one step beyond that, that created a significant frustration point for a lot of employees, because they're like, I keep on getting this internet unstable message, and it was super frustrating. And many organizations have increased stipends or some sort of opportunity to increase Wi-Fi speed. So in short, I think we need to look at how we build our workspaces for the future. And I do think organizations need to create the ability for employees to have connected and no friction workplaces from home if they're going to have a flexible work policy.
Thanks. Helen, I'm going to come to you on this, because obviously in the public sector, we've got used to people being able to request reasonable adjustments in the office. Is that something that you also are offering to NHS staff at home? And you know, where does
certainly reasonable adjustments for home workers that that require it. We haven't been in a position where people have requested. And Jonathan, I completely get your picture. When we first went live with working through Teams, often my video, if it was on, caused it all to crash. So we've always gone, if that's the case, just come on, say hello, let's have a look at you, check you're not in your pajamas and that you are looking happy and you're bought in, and then it's okay, you can switch off now. I think it's something, I think organizations across the world will start decreasing their footprint in offices. So actually you'll see the savings being made there, which they then may increase or put into employees and helping them to build a home working space that's suitable. So I think it's still early days, but yeah, I think it's coming.
Yeah. Thanks, Helen. We literally, I'm not going to ask you the same question, Deborah, because we've got a couple of questions coming in. So I want to move on to something else, because this will probably be the last question. But we've got, Jeremy is asking, so he's picking up on things that we've talked about in terms of diversity and inclusion. And he's saying that he is hearing that people with protected characteristics, he's heard, are becoming more disadvantaged by some of the decisions that have no direct human impact, and kind of technology and algorithms being used to make some decisions in a hybrid future. And also he's saying there are issues potentially for some people in terms of cameras being used, people with some of those characteristics. Deborah, I just wondered from a psychology kind of point of view, again, if you had anything to add on, because you've talked a lot about how solutions need to be bespoke. So in terms of how different people from different groupings with different kind of requirements, different backgrounds might be feeling, is that something, again, that maybe Peakon could help with in terms of really understanding what people are feeling, what their experience is like, and what the right solution might be for them?
Yeah, and I think in the absence of, you know, maybe internal networks that are specific to certain groups of individuals, you know, some organisations are way ahead in terms of having those that are very sort of set up and live within their businesses, where these things can be surfaced and discussed really transparently. But I suppose within, you know, a survey platform, for example, you know, the majority of the organisations that we work with are also looking at their diversity data and, you know, looking at that in alignment with engagement and growth and transparency and pay and all of these different things, and thinking about, you know, where are the key differences and what do we need to be aware of that perhaps we weren't aware of before.
Yeah.
So I think it does open up opportunities to look at your data in a much deeper way if you
Yeah.
if you have that information.
So I guess it's a Jeremy, I'm sorry we don't have more time on those issues, but I guess what everyone's saying is, you know, even before hybrid working, some people struggle to get their voice heard. And going forward, it's just as important that whatever the kind of future model is like, that everybody's voice can be heard, and that solutions are put in place that work for different people with different requirements and different needs. And finally, we're just getting some comments from people saying that some organisations are giving, as I think Patrick mentioned, some kind of resources to people to help them set up those spaces at home. We have one question again from Jennifer, and it was just saying, could we send around the data and the references that Patrick mentioned, just to say we will absolutely do that. And if you didn't manage to get your question answered now, we will make sure that those are all answered behind the scenes, because I'm afraid we have just about run out of time. But I want to say a huge thank you to the audience for sending in such brilliant questions, and so many of them. There will be a link circulated with the video from today's webinar. So if you didn't manage to watch all of it, or if you would like to share it with your colleagues and with your peers, you will be able to do that. And also an article will be produced in a week or so with some of the key issues that were raised today. And we will share that with all of the audience as well. So you can share that amongst your networks and you will have a record of the discussion today. But I would also like to say a huge thank you to our panel for giving us their time and their expertise today. To Helen, again, thank you for everything you do. Thank you for, I know it's a hugely busy time for you, so for giving up your time to spend with us today, we are hugely grateful, and good luck. I know it's going to be another busy period for you over the coming weeks, this winter month. So good luck to you and all your staff there. And to Patrick and to Deborah, thank you so much for sharing your insights from PCON. It's been fascinating to hear how you help organisations across the public sector. And with that, I would like to say goodbye to everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you very soon on another one of our webinars. Thank you so much to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.